What is the worst thing about sitting next to an arrogant intern? Is it listening to him brag about his expensive suit or prestigious degree? No. It is hearing him boast about destroying an entire ecosystem right in front of the one person with the power to throw him in prison. Corporate greed is always blind, and today, they threatened the wrong target. Buckle up. Revenge has never been so cold and precise. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Emery Davis. I am 35 years old, and right now, I am sitting in the absolute lap of corporate luxury, looking entirely out of place. I pulled the collar of my worn, faded fleece jacket up around my neck and shifted my weight in the plush, hand-stitched leather seat. My jeans were dusted with the faint gray salt and grime that only comes from working on the docks, a stark contrast to the immaculate, temperature-controlled environment of the VIP passenger cabin. We were aboard the crown jewel of the Apexia Global Fleet, a transoceanic maglev supership capable of crossing the Atlantic with zero friction and absolute silence. The irony was suffocating. I knew every rivet, every microchip, and every titanium bulkhead of this vessel. Because I was not just a passenger, I was the supreme captain of this very fleet, or at least, I had been until 48 hours ago. A sudden, completely baseless transfer order from the upper echelons of corporate management had stripped me of my command. They pulled me from the bridge, handed me a commercial ticket, and reduced me to a mere spectator on my own ship. I closed my eyes, trying to force myself into a brief nap. I needed to conserve my energy for the battle I knew was coming. The soft, rhythmic hum of the magnetic levitation engines beneath the deck should have been a comforting lullaby. Instead, it felt like a mocking reminder of everything that had been wrongfully taken from me. My attempt at rest, however, was abruptly shattered by a scent so aggressively potent it practically announced itself before the cabin door even fully slid open. It was a noxious cloud of bergamot and synthetic musk, the kind of cologne that cost $500 a bottle and was favored exclusively by men who wanted to mask their lack of competence with an overwhelming sensory assault. I opened one eye. Standing in the aisle was Preston. He was 23 years old, fresh out of some Ivy League business school, and wearing a tailored suit that he definitely did not pay for himself. His hair was slicked back flawlessly, and he carried a leather briefcase tighter than a life preserver. He stopped right next to my row, looking down his nose at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. He scoffed loudly, ensuring everyone within a 50-foot radius could hear him. "Excuse me," he snapped, his voice dripping with the kind of unearned authority only an intern could muster. "You need to move, right now. I am traveling with the big boss, and this section is reserved for crucial corporate personnel, not for whoever you are." I did not flinch. I did not sit up. I simply reached into the pocket of my old fleece, pulled out my digital boarding pass, and held it up in the air. It clearly displayed my seat assignment, row 1. Seat A, the highest-tier VIP ticket available on the entire vessel. I did not say a single word. I kept my eyes locked onto his, my face a mask of absolute, chilling silence. My silence was not born of fear. It was the quiet patience of a predator watching a very loud, very foolish prey walk into a trap. Preston's face turned a mottled shade of crimson. The fact that I had ignored his verbal command and humiliated him with a valid ticket infuriated him beyond reason. "Did you not hear me?" he hissed, leaning in closer, invading my personal space. "I do not care what glitch in the booking system printed that ticket. Look at yourself. You are wearing rags. You are either a cleaner who got lost or some homeless squatter who managed to sneak past the boarding gates. If you do not pack up your garbage and move to the economy deck this second, I will have port security drag you out of here in handcuffs." Before I could even entertain the thought of shutting him down, a new shadow fell over us. It was Vance, the regional executive vice president of Apexia Global. He was the man directly responsible for my sudden demotion. Vance wore a custom-made Italian suit that cost more than a standard deckhand made in 2 entire years. On his wrist sat a platinum watch worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. He carried himself with the heavy, bloated arrogance of a man who believed the rules of physics, let alone the rules of the sea, did not apply to him. Vance placed a manicured hand on Preston's shoulder, shooting me a look of profound, lazy contempt. "Preston, calm down," Vance drawled, his voice smooth and lethally condescending. "Why are you wasting your breath on a bottom feeder? The world needs people to scrub the floors just as much as it needs us to run the empire." Vance smirked, a cruel, satisfied twist of his lips as he looked me up and down. "Let her sit there. Let her stay. Do not call security. Maybe if she keeps her eyes open and keeps her mouth shut, she might actually learn something today. Let her broaden her horizons and see exactly how the true elite conduct their business." I let my heavy eyelids fall shut, leaning my head back against the leather headrest. Vance and his lapdog intern assumed I was cowering, shrinking away from their overwhelming corporate aura. They were wrong. I was simply returning to the darkness of 4 months ago, to the exact moment this war truly began. It was a Tuesday night, deep in the belly of this very ship. While the executives clinked champagne glasses in the observation lounges above, I was down in Subdeck 9. It was a place passengers never saw, a labyrinth of high-pressure pipes, thrumming turbines, and the heavy metallic scent of ozone and grease. I always made it a point to inspect the engineering spaces myself. You do not command a vessel of this magnitude from behind a desk. You command it by knowing its heartbeat. That night, the heartbeat was off. I noticed a discrepancy in the pressure logs of the primary waste management sector. When I crawled through the access hatches to visually inspect the tertiary discharge manifold, the air grew thick with a sharp, acidic chemical burn that stung my eyes. What I found there made my blood run cold. The heavy steel biofiltration valves, the massive mechanisms designed to scrub and neutralize the ship's mechanical runoff, had been completely severed. Fresh, crude weld marks scarred the titanium bulkheads. A bypass pipe, thick as a tree trunk, had been illegally spliced directly into the main external exhaust vents. They were not just dumping gray water, they were preparing to flush thousands of gallons of highly concentrated, toxic industrial solvent directly into the open ocean. It was a calculated, deliberate poisoning of international waters, all designed to bypass the strict environmental regulations and save the company tens of millions of dollars in hazardous waste processing fees. I documented everything. I took high-resolution photographs, downloaded the altered schematic logs, and secured the physical atmospheric sensors. I brought the evidence straight to the upper management deck the very next morning, fully expecting a massive internal investigation and the immediate firing of the engineering chiefs. Instead, I found Vance waiting for me in a soundproof boardroom. He did not look surprised when I laid the digital tablet on the mahogany table. He just let out a long, theatrical sigh and poured himself a glass of sparkling water. "Captain Davis," Vance had said, his voice dropping into a low, menacing register, "you are looking at this all wrong. You see a crime? The board of directors sees a necessary streamlining of operational expenditures. We are operating in a highly competitive market. Those filtration systems are a bureaucratic nightmare. You are going to take this tablet, walk out of this room, and forget you ever went down to Subdeck 9. "It is a federal felony," I replied, my voice steady despite the rage boiling in my chest. "You are destroying marine habitats to pad your quarterly bonuses. I am the captain of this vessel, and I am reporting this to the Maritime Authority." Vance leaned forward, the mask of the polite executive dropping entirely. His eyes were cold, dead things. "If you make one phone call, Emery, I will personally see to it that you never set foot on a boat again, not even a rowboat. I will draft a psychological evaluation by the end of the day, stating you have suffered a severe mental breakdown due to the stress of command. I will have our corporate doctors declare you dangerously paranoid and unfit for duty. Your career will be over. Your reputation will be ashes. You will be lucky to find work as a dockside security guard." He did not wait for my answer. He unilaterally stripped me of my command right then and there. By noon, I was officially transferred to a miserable, desk-bound position as a shoreside cargo supervisor. Vance smiled when security escorted me off the bridge. He honestly believed he had broken me. He thought I was just a rigid, rule-following sailor who would crumble the moment she faced the raw, crushing weight of corporate power. But Vance made one fatal miscalculation. He severely underestimated the technical proficiency of the person who actually ran his billion-dollar machine. Before security escorted me out of the central command hub, they gave me 10 minutes to pack my personal belongings. I only needed 2. While the guards stood outside my office door, I bypassed the local firewall and accessed the ship's deepest navigational core. I wrote a phantom algorithm, a tiny, undetectable piece of code, and buried it beneath millions of lines of standard telemetry data. It was a digital ghost. It was designed to stay completely dormant until the ship's external discharge hatches opened while simultaneously passing through protected oceanic coordinates. Vance thought he had buried the problem by burying me. He had no idea that I had turned his own crown jewel into a massive, floating wiretap, and I had been waiting 4 agonizing months to spring the trap. The low hum of the cabin brought me back to the present. I kept my breathing slow and even, painting the perfect picture of a defeated woman surrendering to exhaustion. Beside me, the rustling of heavy, high-grade paper began. Preston was eagerly pulling documents from his tight leather briefcase, practically vibrating with the desperate need to impress his superior. "I have the final schematics right here, sir," Preston said, his voice a grating mix of subservience and arrogance. "The payload is prepped and sitting in the secondary holding tanks." I heard the distinct sound of a heavy folder hitting the glass table between their seats. "Walk me through the timeline, Preston," Vance murmured, sounding only mildly interested. "I do not like surprises, especially not when we are dealing with international maritime law." "There will be absolutely 0 surprises," Preston beamed, leaning in so close I could smell that suffocating bergamot again. "We are scheduled to pass directly over the protected coral reef sanctuary in exactly 2 hours and 45 minutes, because it is a designated ecological dead zone for commercial vessels. There are 0 maritime patrol boats within a 200-mile radius. At precisely midnight, the automated valves will open. We are dumping the entire payload, 50 tons of untreated industrial solvent, completely flushed into the current. 50 tons, the number echoed in my head, a sickening weight. That volume of toxic solvent would decimate the reef, creating a massive dead zone that would take decades to recover. It was an ecological massacre planned with the casual indifference of a spreadsheet calculation. "And the government inspectors?" Vance asked, tapping his fingers against his armrest. "When we dock tomorrow, they will pull the internal environmental sensor logs. If there is a sudden spike in chemical discharge or a drop in holding tank pressure, they will impound the ship and freeze our assets." Preston let out a smug, breathy laugh. It was the sound of a boy who thought he had outsmarted the world. "That is the best part. I handled it personally. I procured a specialized, bootleg drive from a contact on the dark web." I heard the metallic click of something small being placed on the table. "This little flash drive contains a custom overwrite script. I plugged it into the main engineering terminal before we departed. It forces the environmental sensors to loop historical data. While we are flushing 50 tons of poison into the reef, the ship's computer will be recording a perfectly clean, 100% normal operational baseline. The government inspectors will see nothing but clean water and optimal pressure." The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. White-collar criminals always believed their money and their digital tricks made them untouchable. They operated under the delusion that the physical world, the ocean, the ship, the consequences could simply be edited out like a typo in a quarterly report. They had no idea. Underneath the frayed cuff of my fleece jacket, my left wrist rested quietly on my lap. Disguised as a cheap, scuffed digital watch was a high-grade, military-spec recording device. I had activated it the moment Preston opened his mouth. The internal microphone was currently capturing every single syllable of their confession in crystal clear, high-definition audio. Furthermore, it was not saving the data locally. It was continuously pinging the ship's satellite array, encrypting the audio file, and transmitting it directly to a secure cloud server managed by the Federal Maritime Security Bureau. Even if they realized I was awake and threw me overboard, the evidence was already in the hands of the authorities. Then, the ocean decided to intervene. The massive supership, usually as stable as solid ground, encountered a sudden, sharp cross-current. It was a minor jolt, a barely perceptible shudder in the grand scheme of things. But it was enough. The glass table vibrated, the small metallic USB drive. Preston had been showing off, slid across the smooth surface and tumbled off the edge. It hit the carpeted floor with a dull thud and skidded directly under my seat. "Hey!" Preston barked, his voice instantly dropping its sycophantic tone and returning to raw hostility. I slowly opened my eyes and looked down at my worn boots. The silver drive rested right next to my heel. "Pick that up," Preston ordered, snapping his fingers at me as if I were a disobedient dog. "Carefully. Do not smudge it." I did not react to his tone. I simply leaned forward, allowing my right hand to slip into the deep, front pocket of my jacket for a fraction of a second. My fingers brushed against a small, flat device, no larger than a matchbox, a magnetic data cloner. I kept the cloner palmed in my hand as I reached down to the floor. I picked up the USB drive, as I brought it up, hidden from their line of sight by the bulk of my body. I pressed the drive against the surface of the cloner in my palm. It took exactly 2 seconds. A microscopic, silent vibration against my skin confirmed the transfer was complete. I had just ripped the entire malicious source code, the overwrite script, and every digital fingerprint off his custom drive. I sat back up. My face remained an impassive mask as I casually tossed the USB drive through the air. It landed squarely on Preston's lap. "Keep your garbage on your side," I said quietly, turning my head to look out the darkened window. Preston scoffed, hastily snatching the drive and wiping it on his expensive trousers as if my touch had infected it. "Typical," he muttered to Vance. "No respect for private property." I smiled a very small, very cold smile, completely hidden by the reflection in the glass. He had his physical drive, but I now possessed the very weapon they planned to use against the ocean. The trap was fully set, and the bait had just been swallowed whole. The ocean is a living, breathing entity, and it does not care about the plans of arrogant men. 20 minutes after Preston had safely pocketed his newly cloned drive, the ocean delivered its own verdict. We had crossed into the outer bands of a deep-sea trench, sailing directly into the path of a rogue kinetic current echoing from a distant Category 5 typhoon. The supership, despite its advanced magnetic stabilizers, hit the underwater turbulence like a brick wall. The zero-friction illusion shattered instantly. A violent, bone-rattling shudder tore through the titanium hull, pitching the deck wildly. The cabin lights flickered, casting harsh, strobing shadows across the luxurious space. Emergency alarms blared, a piercing two-tone siren that signaled a Level 4 navigational hazard. The heavy glass table between Vance and Preston shattered as Preston's briefcase slammed into it. The sudden, violent drop in altitude threw everyone violently against their harnesses. Preston's veneer of corporate invincibility evaporated in less than a second. He let out a high-pitched, pathetic shriek, clawing desperately at his armrests. "What is happening?" he screamed, his face completely drained of color. "We are sinking. Get the crew. I demand to see the crew right now." The ship rolled violently to the port side, hitting a massive 30-degree incline. The overhead compartments rattled dangerously. Preston completely lost his mind. He unbuckled his safety harness. He was entirely consumed by blind, irrational panic. He tried to stand up, scrambling over his seat to run for the aft exit doors before the bridge had even issued a structural safety signal. It was a fatal mistake in heavy seas. If the ship rolled again while he was unbuckled, he would be thrown across the cabin and snap his neck. "I did not think," I reacted. Years of naval discipline and disaster response training took over, completely overriding my cover story. In one fluid, explosive motion, I unclipped my own harness, lunged across the aisle, and clamped my right hand onto the back of Preston's neck. My grip was steel. With a sharp, tactical pivot, I yanked him backward, lifting him entirely off his feet, and slammed him violently back into his leather seat. "Sit down and secure your harness," I roared, my voice cutting through the blaring alarms with absolute drill instructor authority. "Brace for secondary impact. Keep your center of gravity low and secure all loose projectiles. Do not move until the bridge clears the gyroscopic stabilizers." Preston was too stunned, too utterly terrified to disobey. He fumbled with his buckles, his hands shaking violently, staring at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. He pressed himself as far back into his seat as humanly possible, completely submissive. I snapped my own harness back into place just as the ship leveled out, the magnetic thrusters roaring beneath us to correct the pitch. The violent rocking subsided into a heavy, rhythmic sway. I looked across the aisle. Vance was staring at me. The smug, aristocratic boredom was completely gone from his face. In its place was a look of profound shock, slowly morphing into a cold, creeping paranoia. He had just watched a woman he believed to be a bottom-feeding janitor execute a physical restraint and issue precise, rapid-fire maritime safety protocols with the undeniable command presence of a senior military officer. The puzzle pieces in his head were starting to clash, forming a picture he desperately did not want to see. The sudden turbulence had rattled more than just his nerves. Paranoia is the constant companion of the guilty. Vance knew that extreme navigational events automatically triggered deep system diagnostic checks across the entire vessel. If the central computer ran a full security diagnostic right now, it might detect Preston's bootleg loop script on the environmental sensors before they could execute the dump. He needed to ensure their tracks were perfectly covered, immediately. His hands were trembling slightly as he snatched his laptop from the floor. Throwing it open on his lap, he furiously tapped the call button overhead. A pale, shaken flight attendant hurried over, gripping the backs of the seats tightly for balance. "I need an open channel to the engineering mainframe, right now," Vance demanded, his voice tight and frantic. "Give me the crew priority network access code." The attendant shook her head, strictly adhering to protocol. "I am sorry, sir. During a Level 4 hazard, all non-essential internal networks are locked out. Only the bridge crew has mainframe access right now. It is federal maritime law." "I do not care about your laws," Vance spat, his desperation making him reckless. He reached into his breast pocket and slapped a thick, black card onto his armrest. "I am an executive officer of this company. This is a Tier 1 override card. It grants me supreme administrative access to every single system on this ship. Enter the authorization code, now." I recognized that card instantly. It was a physical master key, issued only to the Supreme Captain and the Chief Engineer. Vance was neither. The card he held was a highly illegal, black market forgery. If he used it to access the mainframe, he was committing a severe federal cybercrime. This was it, the final nail in his coffin. I needed hard proof of the card in his possession. I casually pulled my smartphone from my jacket pocket. I opened the camera application, switched it to the front-facing mode, and held it up high, framing my face as if I were taking a frightened selfie of myself surviving the storm. But I was not looking at the screen. I tilted the phone precisely 15 degrees to the right. The high-resolution lens focused sharply on the background, locking onto Vance's hand and the distinct, counterfeit serial numbers printed on the black card resting on his armrest. I tapped the capture button 3 times in rapid succession. The digital shutter remained completely silent. The trap had firmly snapped shut. The flash of the screen, or rather the angle of the lens, did not escape Vance. His eyes, already wide with the frantic terror of the storm and the fear of discovery, locked onto the metallic casing of my smartphone. The gears in his head, lubricated by sheer panic, finally ground together. He looked from my face to the phone, then down to the highly illegal, forged override card resting openly on his armrest. The color drained completely from his face, replaced instantly by a violently flushed, ugly shade of crimson rage. "She took a picture," Vance bellowed, his voice cracking, completely losing whatever polished executive composure he had left. He pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my chest. "Preston, get that phone. Get it right now. Break her fingers if you have to. Just get me that device." Preston was still hyperventilating from the turbulent drop, but the direct command from his superior, coupled with the threat of losing his golden corporate ticket, spurred him into a pathetic display of aggressive compliance. He saw a woman in a shabby fleece jacket. He saw someone he believed was a bottom feeder, a nobody he could easily overpower. He unbuckled his safety harness with a frantic click and lunged across the narrow aisle, throwing his entire body weight forward, his hands clawing aggressively toward my face and my device. He never even made contact. I did not panic. I did not raise my voice. I simply let my military muscle memory take over. As his right hand reached for my collar, I sidestepped his clumsy momentum. I grabbed his outstretched wrist with my left hand, applying immediate, agonizing pressure to the radial nerve. Simultaneously, I stepped into his guard, threading my right arm under his tricep, locking his elbow in a textbook, inescapable jujitsu joint manipulation. Using his own forward momentum against him, I pivoted sharply. I drove his trapped arm high up between his shoulder blades, forcing a sharp, breathless gasp of pain from his lungs. With a swift, controlled, downward thrust, I slammed his face directly into the thick, tempered glass of the fold-out executive tray table attached to the center console. The heavy thud of his skull hitting the reinforced glass echoed sharply over the hum of the ship's engines. Preston let out a muffled, pathetic whimper. His cheek flattened painfully against the cold surface, his arm immobilized and pushed to the absolute brink of snapping. I leaned in close, keeping my weight perfectly balanced, pressing my forearm into his spine to ensure he could not move a single muscle. My voice was a dead, flat whisper right into his ear. "You have just committed aggravated assault against a federally commissioned maritime officer in domestic waters," I stated clearly, letting each word sink into his terrified brain like a stone. "That carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. Do not move, or I will break your arm in 3 distinct places." Preston froze entirely, trembling violently beneath my grip, tears of genuine pain and terror welling up in his eyes. He let out a soft sob, his arrogance completely evaporating into the cold, hard reality of his situation. I kept him pinned with one hand. With my free hand, I reached up and grasped the zipper of my faded, grease-stained fleece jacket. I pulled it down in one smooth, deliberate motion, letting the heavy fabric fall open and drop from my shoulders. Beneath the disguise of the dockworker's jacket was the immaculate, perfectly pressed, stark white uniform shirt of a supreme naval commander. The gold epaulets, previously hidden from view, now caught the harsh cabin light and gleamed with undeniable authority. The silver insignia of the Maritime Authority rested heavily above my breast pocket, a silent testament to the oath I had sworn to protect the ocean. Vance stopped breathing. He stared at the uniform, his jaw completely slack, his eyes bulging as if he were looking at a ghost. He tried to speak, but only a dry, rattling wheeze escaped his throat. His entire body began to shake. I looked directly into his eyes, matching his absolute terror with absolute, freezing calm. "Black market override card. Serial number Alpha 7924 Omega," I recited clearly and loudly, watching the last remaining shred of Vance's arrogance shatter into dust. "Photographic evidence captured, encrypted, and uploaded to the Federal Maritime Security Bureau servers exactly 45 seconds ago. The audio recording of your intern detailing the 50-ton chemical payload drop was transmitted 3 minutes prior. Your internal network cannot stop it. Your money cannot stop it. You are completely exposed." Vance slumped back in his leather seat, his custom Italian suit suddenly looking like a poorly fitted prison uniform. The psychological devastation was total. He looked at me, truly looked at me, and the horrific realization finally dawned on him. He looked down at the pocket where Preston had stashed the USB drive, then back up at my cold, unblinking stare, the pieces locked together in his mind. The accidental drop of the drive, my quiet compliance, the sudden storm that trapped them in their seats. He realized every single variable had been anticipated and manipulated. He thought back to the soundproof boardroom 4 months ago. He remembered the smug satisfaction he felt when he threatened my career, when he ordered me off my own bridge, when he thought he had successfully buried a rigid, rule-following subordinate. He had genuinely believed he was the apex predator playing a brilliant game of corporate chess. Now, he understood the chilling truth. He had not broken me. He had not outsmarted me. I had willingly walked into the dark, accepting his demotion without a fight, specifically to lull him into a false sense of absolute security. Every single thing that had happened over the past 120 days, the transfer, the silence, the careful monitoring, and finally sitting directly across from him on this specific voyage, was not a coincidence. It was a flawlessly executed, meticulously planned trap. He had spent the last 4 months digging his own grave, and I had simply handed him the shovel. The mighty regional executive vice president of Apexia Global was nothing more than a rat trapped in a cage of his own making, and I held the only key. I released my grip on the intern. Preston slumped off the reinforced glass table and collapsed onto the carpeted floor, clutching his shoulder and sobbing uncontrollably. I stepped over him, not sparing him a single glance. I walked straight past Vance, who was still frozen in his seat, staring into the abyss of his own destroyed future. I moved purposefully down the main aisle, heading directly for the heavy, blast-proof steel door of the primary navigational bridge. Due to the severe weather protocols, the command center was entirely locked down. The biometric scanners were glowing red, denying access to all commercial personnel. I did not use the scanner. I reached under the primary console, flipped open the manual emergency panel, and rapidly punched in a sequence of 16 alphanumeric keystrokes. It was the Supreme Command override cipher, known only to the highest-ranking officer of the fleet. The heavy internal deadbolts retracted with a loud, definitive metallic clank. The thick steel door hissed and slid open. I stepped onto the bridge. The room was bathed in the dim blue light of the tactical monitors, tense with the ongoing storm navigation. But the moment I crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Every single officer on duty, from the navigators to the communications specialists, immediately turned away from their consoles. They stood perfectly straight, their heels clicking together in unison, and offered a crisp, deeply respectful salute. "Captain Davis, systems are ready and awaiting your command," the first officer stated, his voice ringing out loud and clear, carrying straight back into the VIP cabin. From the corner of my eye, I saw Vance physically flinch. Hearing my title spoken with such absolute reverence by the active bridge crew was the final blow. Any desperate, lingering hope he had that I was bluffing was entirely annihilated. I walked to the central command pedestal and picked up the heavy, red emergency broadcast microphone. My voice echoed across every deck, every corridor, and every cabin of the massive supership. "This is Supreme Captain Emery Davis. I am declaring a Code Red federal maritime emergency. I am hereby seizing direct manual command of this vessel. Helm. Disengage all automated navigation protocols immediately. We are executing a hard port turn. Set a new heading for the nearest federal military naval port. Give me maximum available thrust." The deck tilted sharply beneath our feet as the massive engines roared to life, fighting the storm and physically ripping the ship away from the protected reef coordinates. We were no longer on a commercial voyage. We were a military transport delivering 2 high-value criminals directly into the hands of the law. 2 hours later, the storm had broken, and we sailed into the heavily fortified military harbor. We did not get a quiet reception. The docks were absolutely swarming with flashing red and blue lights, dozens of armored police vehicles, federal transport vans, and specialized environmental protection units had surrounded the landing pier. Before the gangway had even fully extended, heavily armed tactical agents breached the hull and stormed the VIP cabin. Vance collapsed entirely. When the tactical officers clamped the heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists, his legs gave out. He dropped to his knees on the luxurious carpet, sobbing and begging the agents to let him call his corporate lawyers, pleading desperately to negotiate a settlement. They did not even look at him as they hauled him to his feet. Preston was a complete disaster. He wept uncontrollably, loudly begging for my mercy, screaming that he was just a student and that Vance had forced him to do it. The lead federal agent simply ignored his cries, reached directly into Preston's trouser pocket, and pulled out the silver flash drive. The agent dropped the critical evidence into an anti-static evidence bag, zipping it shut before dragging the screaming intern away. I stood alone on the upper observation deck, the cool morning breeze washing over me. I had finally put on my formal naval trench coat. The 4 thick, brilliant gold stripes on my shoulders caught the early morning sunlight, radiating undeniable authority. I leaned against the titanium railing, watching silently as the 2 corporate parasites were shoved into the back of a heavily armored federal transport van. The heavy metal doors slammed shut, sealing their fate. I turned away from the noise of the docks and looked out toward the vast, sparkling expanse of the open ocean. The water looked deeper, brighter, and completely untainted. I let out a long, quiet breath and smiled. The sea was finally clean today. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Boss Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.